Welcome to this week's Eternal Monday. I have a little bit of a different video for you today. I've been thinking a lot about the cards that get played in the Eternal format, and it's really cool to see some of the cards that we maybe have seen in the past see some play, or see some card that kind of didn't see any play or didn't see a ton of play in its time, see a great amount of play in Eternal. We have cards like Lapras from Legend Maker that really show up in just about every deck. But it got me thinking, what are the cards that probably should show up in more decks than they do? Like, surely there are some cards that absolutely are super powerful and should be in a lot more decks than they are. And so I kind of thought about it for a bit, and I think I know exactly the 5 that it should be. I've mentioned one of these in a previous video, but I'm gonna bring it up again because frankly, it's still underplayed, and that is Unknown E. So number 5 is an Unknown E. Unknown E is an extremely potent card. It's almost like a balanced or fair Marshadow. It gives you an option to throw down a Pokemon, and you can just shuffle your hand, redraw. So you get 4 more cards. Your opponent also has the opportunity to shuffle draw 4 if they want, but they are not forced to. This card is an amazing way just to get a little bit of extra draw support in your deck. It's a Pokemon, so it's something you can search out with like a Quick Ball or a Mysterious Treasure. You can find it off of something like a Self, if you're playing that to fish out Pokemon from the prizes. So there are tons of ways to get access to Unknown, which makes me really wonder why this isn't in more decks. I understand some decks are super tight on bench space, but this just feels like a no-brainer for so many decks, especially decks that are running cards like Mysterious Treasure. And number 4 is Cynthia's Feelings. I feel like this card is criminally underplayed. Most decks run like Research or INO, maybe even like an N or a Marnie, but fairly few decks run Cynthia's Feelings, and a good chunk of those are my lists. I run Cynthia's Feelings in my Charizard list and in my my Magnezone list, but for the most part, Cynthia's Feelings is kind of missing in action in a lot of decks. It first popped up in Eternal in a Gardevoir deck piloted by one of my locals, and it kind of caught on briefly for a little bit and then kind of faded back out. But this card is super, super strong when you have players taking knockouts back and forth fairly frequently, and you have the opportunity to shuffle draw 8 after a knockout, especially when you have access to it with something like Versus Seeker. I just don't understand why this card is seeing so little play. Let me know in the comments, why do you think Cynthia's Feelings sees less play than it probably should? And the fact that it doesn't benefit your opponent also is really kind of potent. This is this notion of being able to really shuffle draw a ton of cards. More recently in standard format, there was a card called Cynthia's Ambition that was very much kind of hearkening back to this card, but it's just nowhere near as powerful as Cynthia's Feelings. And at number 3, we have Staraptor FB Level X. This one popped up recently-ish, not recently anymore, I guess, in SP Control, if you've seen that video. But it, other than making an appearance in the first draft of Blissey, it really hasn't seen a ton of play either, which is crazy because something like Fast Call has seen tons of play in Standard with something like Gallade, and that was a stage 2, whereas this is effectively the equivalent of a stage 1. It's not obviously not a stage 1, but you have to level it up. But it's a free retreater. It gets you your supporter. It's super strong, super effective, but it just doesn't see the play that I would expect from it. I know a lot of decks maybe don't run enough supporters to feel like they deserve a Fast Call, but at the same time, especially decks that run things like Winona or Featherball, I feel like Staraptor is a no-brainer. Just kind of throw it in. Now again, you do have to have Staraptor FB with it, so maybe that's what the deterrent is. That's a little harder to search out for some decks, but Staraptor FB Level X is super, super good just in general as a way to find your supporters, and especially decks that aren't running like the Battle Compressor Versus Seeker combo to get what they want. I feel like this is probably the next best option. A card that's surprisingly underplayed too is Minun. Minun is kind of like a single prize version, if you will, of Pheasantipity in the current standard format. Obviously, Pheasantipity was not the first version of that kind of effect, and neither was Oricorio before it, but Minun kind of takes that chart, if you will. So when you are trying to recover from your opponent knocking your Pokemon out, Minun is there to draw you 2 extra cards. Now, it's not 3, which does make it worse, but it's also a single prizer option. So there is that trade-off, right? You can draw 1 fewer card, but you also don't have a multi-prizer in play. And this is fairly easy to search off of something like a Miraidon. So if you're running the Miraidon engine, like let's say you're playing Charizard or you're playing Miraidon itself, or even Magnezone, Minun is definitely a good option. Now, I will confess, I originally had a Minun in my manga zone list, and it just didn't need Minun because of all the draw that the manga zones themselves were providing. So I guess I could sort of see why some decks wouldn't be running this, especially if they're running a Claydol engine. But anything that's running something like the Pidgeot engine or literally any other draw engine, even something more based on Staraptor FB level X, I feel like you have to include a Minun in the deck. It's just such a good option, and it's so easy to get out with so many options that you have, again, like Miraidon. But the single most underplayed card in the Eternal format, or at least I feel like the single most underplayed card in the Eternal format, is one that one of my locals has been absolutely terrorizing with lately, and I feel like more people should be throwing it in their decks. They recently won with Bayonet, including this card. They've won with Hydrapple, including this card. This card is just extremely good. It does kind of just automatically shuts down a lot of decks, and frankly, I don't understand why players don't deal with it, like why they don't account for it in their deck building, or at least have some sort of out against it. But they don't. And that card, of course, is Wobbuffet with its Bide Barricade. Bide Barricade says, as long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, each Pokemon in play in each player's hand and in each player's discard pile has no abilities except for Psychic Pokemon. Wobbuffet absolutely ruins some decks' days. The aforementioned Charizard, for example, does not set up very well without it because it runs so few search cards. Miraidon, very much in that same situation where it just struggles to set up because it's running so few search cards. And Bide Barricade is what ends that, right? Wobbuffet, again, you would think in a format where we have these Pokemon powers and Pokebodies and Pokepowers, that shutting off abilities wouldn't be the biggest deal, but it turns out it is. It's a huge deal. And if you're already running a float zone in your deck anyway, I feel like including a Wobbuffet or two just to throw in the active, kind of like a lot of players now throw a Badoo in the active, just kind of throw it out there and get a little active something turn one. I feel like Wobbuffet is that guy for Eternal. It's interesting too because Wobbuffet is fairly popular in the expanded format, and you would really think it would be in Eternal, but it's just not. I encourage more people to put these 5 cards in their decks, especially this Wobbuffet. I know I'm going to be looking at my own Bayonet list and reworking it so that I do actually have a couple copies of Wobbuffet in there, because I know Wobbuffet's a juicy monster, and since item locking doesn't always do the best thing turn 1, since it's on a coin flip with Shuppet, might as well ruin their day with a good old-fashioned Wobbuffet, especially since it really wrecks decks like United Wings. But that is it from me today. I know a lot of players watching these videos are not the most versed in the Eternal format, but I am curious, what cards do you think are underplayed in the Eternal format? What card do you think should see more play than it does? Let me know in the comment section below. I will see you guys in the next video.